Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Friedman, and I'm on the board of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society, and we'd like to welcome you. 400 people signed up for the program this afternoon, and that's absolutely fantastic, but not surprising when you consider the subject. We're going to focus on the film Ninth Circuit Cowboy, The Long Good Fight of Harry Pregerson. And I hope you've all seen it at least once. But if not, you should use the opportunity of learning about the film today and watch it with the code you've got or on Amazon Prime streaming. To say it's inspiring is an understatement. We have an amazing program, and now a plug for our sponsor, the Historical Society. That we do a lot of good programs, and our mission is to preserve the legal history of the West, and more generally to educate about the importance of an independent judiciary. I encourage you all to join. Membership is important, or at least get on our mailing list, and you can get details about that in your chat box. And we'll also follow up with an email for everyone who registered for the program. Now, a number of people want to get continuing legal education credit for this, and so bear with me as we walk through how that works for the CLE credit and a certificate of attendance. During the program, a numeric verification code will appear in the chat box. You must write this down in order to get the CLE credit. It's a requirement. Afterwards, you'll go to the Society website to complete the verification form and get the credit. The Society will process this, and depending on your jurisdiction, get you what you need or submit it directly to the State Bar. One last logistical thing, we should have time for some questions, and those should also be typed into the chat box. They'll be cycled over to me, and then I will ask our special guests. And now it's time to introduce our panel, our guests. I could go on and on, but I won't. We have with us today Judge Harry Pregerson's children, Judge Dean Pregerson of the Central District of California, and Katie Rodan, a serial entrepreneur, philanthropist, and dear friend. A few quick words about Dean and Katie. Dean began his career as a parole hearing officer with the California Department of Corrections. He joined the Guam Public Defender's Office. I remember when he lived in Guam for a few years. That was extremely exotic. He returned to California to a private litigation practice until he was nominated to the Central District by President Clinton to the seat vacated by Judge Wally Tashima. Judge Pregerson assumed senior status in 2016. Katie is a dermatologist, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, as I said. She's co-creator of what everyone has heard of, Proactive, and co-founder of skincare company Rodan and Fields. She was listed by Forbes as one of the 50 most successful self-made women in the United States. Katie and her family endowed and actively manage the Rodan Family Foundation, which is doing important work. Our third panelist, who unfortunately has come down with laryngitis and will be neither seen nor heard by you, but will definitely be here as part of the program, is our filmmaker, the Academy Award winner, Terry Sanders. Terry has produced and or directed more than 70 features, television specials, documentaries, portrait films, co-heads the American Film Foundation, has produced and photographed the Oscar-winning dramatic short, A Time Out of War. He also received an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature for Maya Lin, A Strong, Clear Vision. We're going to work Terry into some of the questions so you'll have some of the sense of his perspective on making this film and why he did and how it went about. And I am having the honor of being the moderator tonight. Katie and Dean insisted that they did not want to know the questions in advance. They did not want to have a rehearsal. So we're just going to go for it and have a good conversation. I clerked for Judge Pregerson a long time ago, and I've known the Pregerson family, believe it or not, I just figured it out, for 50 years. The judge was a wonderful mentor to me, and he actually taught me how to be a mentor, which is something that I work hard at. He made a huge difference in my life, and I know this is true for scores of clerks who worked with the judge over many years. So with that, we're gonna get started, and I'd like to pick up and ask if either of you know, how many clerks did Harry have? And did you ever hear him say, the best part of this job is my clerks?
He said that often, Paul, and he always said, and Paul was the best.
Okay, sure. I'm sure that's definitely true.
Yeah.
Any idea how many he had?
I have no idea. I would 100. I have no idea. Maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved
And
every one of them.
And I don't know everyone who's on the Zoom, so I hope I wouldn't offend anyone, but he just said that he thought the clerks were more fun than the judges.
I thought you were going to say his children.
Oh no. And he had a tradition, didn't he, of having a photo of every clerk from the beginning to the very end on the walls, which is why he needed an ever expanding set of chambers.
Well, that's all true, Paul. I mean, he had, I don't know what the number is. I'm guessing it was around 150, but I could be way off. But he cherished everybody, and he he had daycare centers basically in chambers. He followed kids and the children of the clerks, and he felt that he was making lifelong friends with his clerks and people that he really cared about. But I think that was just his character. That was just his nature anyway. As my mom always said, he really was a person that combined a lot of strength, but no guile. And those were, sort of remarkable qualities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what is the story about the cowboy hat? When did that come into the picture, and why?
Katie?
Well, I don't know if you'd like to hear me say this, but I think part of it maybe had to do a little bit with vanity. I think it was when he was starting to lose his hair, and also it gave him the advantage of looking taller. And so for both of those reasons, but it just became his trademark, and I think he really enjoyed it, and it was part of his branding, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Because in the old footage of Boyle Heights, I didn't see that many people, any cowboys.
That's right.
There were a lot of cowboys that were just in disguise at that time. A lot of great folks came out of East LA and Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of cowboys and cowgirls, cowwomen too.
So Dean, what's your recollection of how the film came to be? Like, how did Terry get into the picture, and what was the evolution?
Yeah, so Harry passed really suddenly. I was over at the house, and Katie was there, and we knew that he was struggling, but I left him in the evening and went home. And when I got home, Katie called me and said, you know, Harry just died, just passed away. And it was just this this shock. And you know, I rushed back and we made calls and did all the things that you do that you don't know how to do, but you figure it out. And then Katie's wonderful husband, Amnon, came down. My wonderful wife, Sharon, pitched in, our son, Brad. And, you know, in the sort of Jewish tradition, we knew that we needed to put things together rather quickly. So we thought, well, let's rent the Shrine Auditorium. And my brother-in-law, Amnon, and, you know, worked the phones. He's an amazing person. And pretty soon we had the Shrine Auditorium. And you know, we were making arrangements for Harry to be buried at the Veterans National Cemetery in Westwood, and you know, the Marine Corps and all of the people that needed to be notified. But sort of in the midst of this sort of very, you know, intense period, we got a call from this fellow who said, you know, I'm Terry Sanders, and I'd like to film the memorial service. And we didn't know Terry. And we said, fine. We had to deal with some union issues with the shrine, and that got all worked out. And so then Terry filmed the memorial service. And from that became a deep friendship with Terry and our family that, will last for the rest of our lives. So that's sort of the short version. So I think after Terry filmed the memorial, he, I don't want to talk too much about it, but he just simply felt that there was a great story to be shared there, and that's how it started.
I think it's also interesting as to what brought Terry there. And many other people who did not know my dad. Terry's story was very interesting because one of his very close friends was one of the what were then called draft dodgers during the Vietnam War, and I think had to have some mandatory service unless they said they were conscientious objectors, which my dad was always trying to get everybody to say, and they said, no, I object to this war. And so his dear friend said, we've got to go to this memorial because this is truly a great man. And what happened was the person who one of the guys who was another draft dodger.
Yeah.
Can't think of a better word to use right now. But he had been sentenced by my dad just before, and my dad had gone, which I did not know. He would go to all of the prisons where if he had sent somebody to jail and visit them and see what the conditions were like. And evidently this guy was in solitary confinement because I think he had he was on a starvation diet in protest. And my dad sees him, and he doesn't even know, the prisoner doesn't even know who my dad is. But what happens is after my dad saw him, he said, I will never, ever, I don't care what I'm supposed to do, send another human being to jail if they're protesting the Vietnam War. So the first guy who came into the courtroom to be tried and sentenced was Terry's friend, and my dad didn't send him to jail, and he didn't even know the story until many, many years later. So that's why he brought Terry Sanders along. And I think Terry, he said he didn't know what to expect, but he thought, can't hurt. He's a filmmaker, he'll bring along a camera and just see what comes of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting too, because we didn't know Terry, and it's like, well, this guy, Terry Sanders, I'll Google him. It's like, oh, wait, 2 Academy Awards. So, we thought I mean, to this day, we feel so blessed and fortunate to have Terry and his family and just, his friendship. So it's really a wonderful story.
And in addition to obviously being the source of such a wealth of firsthand information, did you both or your mom, Bern, have conversations with Terry about what to include and what not to include, or you have to talk to this person and that sort of thing?
You want me to talk about this one, Katie?
Yeah,
sure. So Terry is an independent filmmaker, and it was his project. He's the artist, and we made no attempt to tell Terry what to include, and I think that was very liberating. Terry was he's an artist, and the best thing you can do with a talented artist is to let him be a talented artist. So that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Terry has talked about that really made an impression on him was when, Katie, you placed Harry's hat on the speaker's podium at the memorial service. I think you did, because it sort of just gave the feeling that Harry's spirit was right there in the middle of the memories. What talk about that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to. This is such an emotional conversation. Not only, Paul, seeing you after so many years, and we go back to high school, but thinking about my dad and his presence. To me, he's still alive. His presence is there all the time. I hear his voice in my head. I can anticipate a response that he would have made to something that a person says in conversation. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly why, but I wanted him there. I felt that I personally would feel very comforted if I had his hat in front of me and knew he was there. He was such an important person in my life. So I left it there, and I not knowing the impact that it would make and how that really touched Terry. And so anyway, that's what happened.
So Dean, you mentioned that there were edits or changes to the film from when it first came out, and I think we law clerks got an opportunity to see it then. But can you describe what were the edits or changes, or what's different?
Well, I think we just saw some rough cuts initially, and I think that Terry tweaked the sound, and there was really nothing substantive. When he was ready to show it to us, it was 95% of what is on Amazon right now. Yeah.
And what was each of your reaction when you first saw the rough cut?
Katie?
Oh, totally emotional, and he really captured it. Terry did such a brilliant job. And I think the message is the power of a single individual, somebody who was not born into a family of connections, any wealth, not even really that educated, and a poor kid from East LA, and what he was able to do with his life that made such a difference in literally millions of lives, if you include a lot of his rulings. It's an inspirational story, because many people, as we look at a big problem, we say, oh, I'm just one person. What could I possibly do? And so it really is incumbent upon all of us, as my dad would have wanted to tell everyone that we all do our share to leave this world a better place than we entered. And Terry did just a great job. I found it very inspirational, very emotional. My mother, I thought, was the star of the show. My nephew Brad was right up there too. And just wonderful, wonderful stories that came out, and so much about him I learned.
Yeah.
I had the same
Dean?
feeling. I had the same feeling. It's one of those things where it's a little bittersweet because you think, gosh, there's so much more that you could say, about the young kid who decides that his life's mission is going to be to help people. That's it. And every tool that he had, from his intelligence, his physical presence, his courage, that's what it was all about, Marine Corps. And I think that part of it for me was that sometimes those messages of courage get lost generation to generation as you step further away from folks that put their life on the line for their country, and really understood collective purpose and sacrifice and honor and decency and truth. And I think that for me, it was just so important to say to particularly younger kids or younger lawyers, you don't have to fit in this pattern. You can be your own person. Think about what you want to do with your life. And also, there were so many things that, I mean, you could have talked about Heal the Bay. You could have talked about 15 years ago, Harry saying, I'm not separating families on immigration cases. I'm just not going to do that. And he had a principled reason for articulating why he thought the law was on his side, but no one would agree with him. But he just wouldn't do it. And I think it was maybe just his experience personally of dealing with evil and that sort of slippery slope towards loss of morality that, for me, made the film very powerful.
And what I'd like to add to that is, Harry was a Marine, as Dean described, in spirit and for his entire life. And, the Marines don't leave a wounded person on a battlefield. And to my dad, all of the people who didn't have a voice, who didn't have power, who were beaten down by the system, were wounded. And I gave him the nickname when I was a teenager, because I saw it, of the rescue machine. He just wanted to rescue all of these people. Mm-hmm. And it was truly inspirational. And any power that he acquired was not for his own personal gain. It was how he could use that power and that charisma that he had, that force of personality, to affect change. And I feel, I can't even tell you how lucky I feel to have been his daughter. So.
Paul, he would say things sometimes that would, there just weren't things you would hear from many people. He said to me, my big regret was not landing on D-Day. He goes, they sent the Marines to the Pacific. He goes, but I wanted to be on Normandy on day one. And I just thought, how many people have that as one of their regrets, knowing that it was just, the possibility of surviving was not great, but that wasn't what concerned him. What concerned him was, I want to fulfill my mission of protecting this country and its values at all costs. Mm-hmm. It's just remarkable in many ways.
Absolutely. I always knew about Boyle Heights and the background and where he came from. He talked about it all the time. But the kind of a really impactful and dramatic and searing part of the film is the story of what the officer did to him and his friend at Quantico. And of course, Byrne, who I agree with Katie, was the star of the film, telling that. Of course, I'd never heard that before. And when you think about how ingrained how much it was part of him to stand up for the underdog in every instance, it just, he felt it himself. He was in that instant powerless to deal with a completely unfair and unjust situation. But when did each of you first hear that story, and what's your thought about how that impacted his life's work?
Well, I remember very clearly when he told me this, because I was spending a lot of time with my dad when I was a teenager, because my mom went back to school. So he was sort of, stuck taking care of me. And I would hear all of his stories and his war stories and everything. And I remember him telling me that story and how painful it was. And I don't think he had even received that letter of apology from the Marine Corps at that even point in time, but just how traumatic that experience was and how compelled he was to sign up the next day to, be a lowly soldier in the Marine Corps and be sent to the front lines. And it really stuck with me. We all face, incredible, difficult, challenging obstacles that happen through our lives that we don't necessarily deserve, but it happens. And just in the way in which you deal with those kinds of problems and challenges really defines who you are, your character as a human being.
Dean?
I agree with Katie. I mean, that was a story. I was aware of that. It wasn't something that, was a big secret in our family. We knew that Harry, because he was a Jewish kid, had, ran across some bad people, and they made him suffer. And he overcame those issues and fought through them. But it certainly, it was what it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Dean, in terms of your judicial career,
maybe we should have had that rehearsal after all.
So Katie said something that I think not only resonated with me, but will resonate with a lot of the clerks and colleagues who are on this Zoom, which is that he's still in here and always has been and always will be. And here you sat on the bench you still sit on the bench, for many years. And what things did you take from him, whether it was advice or how he, acted as a judge, exercised his judgment, et cetera? How would you say he impacted your approach to being a judge?
Yeah, I think it's more, the question might be, how did he impact your approach towards being a human being? Because I think that's really the key to being a good judge, a good person, any of those things. And, the law was always important. And I always joke that I grew up with law books in my room because Harry ran out of space in his office. But I think it was just his, and my mom, of course, just their values. And these were kids that grew up in the Depression. They understood anti-Semitism. They understood prejudice. They understood being othered. So I think it's, within that context that, you learn those lessons, you hear those stories. And I think Harry was under no illusion that, he'd say to me, being a judge is tough. He'd say, if you look at the history of the federal judiciary, there's a lot of decisions that have been made that are shameful. There are a lot of decisions that have hurt a lot of people. And I think that one of the things that I always took away from him was that you have to look at the people behind whatever you're doing. You have to look at the practical effect of these decisions. If you don't, you still are going to do what you need to do. Certainly, you took that oath, but you have to be mindful of those decisions. You can't hide behind the law and avoid being a human being.
Well, one of the things that was mentioned in the film, which I actually thought was a pretty unfair caricature, but see what you guys think. This notion that he ruled with his heart instead of his head. And I say I thought it was pretty unfair because I sat with him for hours and hours and hours going over every word and every case and making sure that a decision, was legally correct. But maybe each of you could comment on that one.
Katie?
You start, Dean. I would say people must have, felt threatened by him to say that, because my dad was so smart and so quick, but what drove him the most was compassion. And so he had to find ways to use the law to be compassionate and help other people. And so heart was an important part of it. Maybe a lot of judges don't look at things that way. And so they wouldn't characterize that as being, a valuable or an important skill. I don't know. That's crazy.
It's an interesting question, and it's false. He didn't rule with his heart. I think that what he had was this understanding of the sort of depth of the law, going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years through the common law up to the present. And he sort of appreciated the fact that there is wisdom to be derived from all of the paths that other judges have taken. And you have to understand your job in the context of that history. Ruling with his heart sounds like he was sort of imperious and, making decisions without regard to the law. I think that, that he's often this phrase about, if he had to choose between his conscience and the law, would he follow his conscience or the law? And he said, well, I'd follow my conscience. And then he sort of explained that history that I just referred to. He referenced the Bill of Rights, the Boy Scout oath, the Marine Corps, him, and just sort of all of the things. And I think what it really meant to me was that he was saying to the world, there are lines that I won't cross. And, I'm not going to be the guy that's going to say that it's fine to go along with some horrible law that discriminates against folks. That's not me. That's what he would say. And so I think it was really just a statement of common sense that the judges take an oath to the Constitution, and that, at some point there's a line that he wasn't willing to cross. And, that's the way I interpret that sort of component of the way people sometimes describe it.
Yeah. I think at his confirmation hearing for the circuit, he was pressed on that, whether it's a real choice or a false choice of, well, would you follow the law or your conscience, right? And I assume he was ready for the question, or it was a pretty fantastic answer, because he said, well, my conscience is a product of the 10 Commandments, the Bill of Rights, the Boy Scout oath, the Marine Corps hymn. And if you know, if I had to choose, I would follow my conscience. And there he was, you know, confirmed, and you know, honest about who he was. So I agreed with Katie that Bradley was a star of the show too. And there was one thing that stuck with me since I'm a grandpa now, and that is he said when Harry was, you know, wanting him to do stuff that Harry wanted him to do, and he said he wanted to go play and have fun, and Grandpa said, quote, "Fun is bullshit," close quote. So what did Judge Pregerson like to do, Harry Pregerson like to do for fun?
Katie?
I think, you know, be with people, help people, you know, I heard that in so many times, you know, happiness is bullshit, fun is bullshit. And I would just think he was joking around and being kind of this fake curmudgeon. And when I got older, I realized exactly what he meant by that your happiness, your source of joy or fun, whatever adjective you want to use, really comes not from a momentary little fleeting pleasure necessarily, like, you know, going to Disneyland, but it honestly comes to you through how you are able to help other human beings, you know, get through life and use whatever skills or power, whatever you have. And you know, I saw that. So he was one of the most optimistic, happy human beings I know. He didn't have many hobbies other than gardening, which, you know, sadly gave him a lot of skin cancers that I kept referring him to people I know to take care of. But yeah, he just wasn't one of those kind of guys. He wouldn't sit down and watch a football game, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. I think, you know, I think about it in terms of sort of the true meaning of joy. He was really saying, you know, seek joy. And joy comes from being a good person, you know, sort of fun. That's okay. But really, if you want to aspire to something, think about joy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's too obtuse. I don't know. But that's the way I think about it.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can look at some of these questions that have come in. Okay, that's a good one. Would you please address Harry Pregerson's sense of humor?
He was quick.
Either.
He was quick. He always came back, you know, with just some wonderful kind of, and sometimes it would be a little bit biting response back, but he you know, it wasn't in terms of him being a great joke teller. He wasn't very good at that, but he always saw the humor, and a lot of his response had to do with, like, don't take yourself so seriously. So I could think of many funny stories that he would recount of something that he'd said to another judge or to a lawyer or something. And I couldn't believe he could think on his feet that quickly.
Yeah, no, I mean, his humor was, you know, I think about it in sort of the Mark Twain vein, but he was equal. You know, there was a quip, there was something funny. He was almost always a step ahead. And he really just, you know, he just saw the human condition and saw the humor in so much of it. It's just, there's so many stories, some of them a little bit outrageous. you know, I probably shouldn't share this one, but I can't help myself. Well, I'm not going to do it. Never mind.
Oh, come on.
I know, I was
Paul,
thinking
I'll
of a
tell you
few and
later.
I thought, but you know, I think another thing is that, as you saw, and you know, my Bradley talked about the hairy handshake, and I actually have one of his hand grippers here that he used to use, so he could really give that strong handshake. But I think one of the ways in which he could quickly make somebody feel good, and you know, like they were always the only person in the room, was and break the ice, was through humor and his storytelling, his humorous ways of telling stories. And he was so right, because that's just the best way to kind of make that personal connection, even with a stranger.
Mhm.
I think that's right, Paul. He really just, you know, he had this love of people. And my mom used to say, well, there's your dad interviewing someone. So if you try to walk down a street with him or go through an airport, you could go through an airport in Memphis switching planes. He would run across two people that he knows. It would never end. One day he was trying to, you know, build this homeless shelter, get it going on the VA property in Westwood, and there was a lot of neighborhood resistance. And you know, it just, you know, he goes to this meeting and the neighbors are all upset. They're calling him names, and we don't want a homeless shelter on this VA property. The neighborhood's nice and all of that. And he's with my wife, Sharon, and he leaves, and Sharon goes, gosh, that was brutal. And Harry's like, oh no, he goes, it was fun. He goes, I had a really good time. Sharon says, well, what do you mean? She goes, how can you say that? And he says, well, he goes, the project's already been approved. And Sharon says, well, what do you mean it's already been approved? He goes, well, I talked to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs this morning. So it was just that, you know, that sort of ability to connect with so many people. And he knew so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think, Katie, you talked about the draft dodger case, or and that was one of the things that struck me. We got a question about it too, from Michael Tiger. He says, when I first appeared before Judge Pregerson in 1969, he already had made a reputation as sympathetic to conscientious objectors in military service, despite his own military background. And I mean, obviously, as we've discussed, you know, having been a Marine, his experience as a Marine was so fundamental to him and in his chambers, and, you know, everything about it. And what did he, and, you know, no one had to draft him. But other than seeing the conditions of this one, you know, conscientious objector that he, you know, had visited in prison, do either of you know anything more about what changed his mind, or shaped his approach to that issue? Because that was really interesting to me.
Katie?
I was going to ask you.
Well, sure. I mean, I think when you've been shot in both legs and you understand what it's like to be in combat, I think that he didn't need to prove anything. And he was simply looking at people, and, you know, and with a lot of these folks, he felt that their convictions were deep and genuine. And he just had to respect that. And he was not a rigid person. When it came to the Vietnam War, you know, he was a patriot in terms of supporting his country, but he also recognized the value of dissent, and he respected it. So I don't think it was that hard for him to, you know, to not be swayed by pressure or anything else, and just you know, do what he felt was right.
You know, and it sort of brings up another memory that I have, because my dad was willing to rethink firmly held, you know, sort of ideas that he had. And it even was true, I'll never forget when he had his first female law clerk. And I was in high school at the time, and he, one of his law clerks had to leave, I think. And so he, midway through, so my dad calls up the dean of UCLA Law School, and he says, can you send me your best person? And they go, sure. So they send this person named Jean, and I'm blanking on her last name. And my dad goes, I got this law clerk from, UCLA, and Jean isn't a man, it's a woman. And I said, that's great. I remember my mom was sitting there too, and we're like, oh, well, so what's wrong with that? And he said, that's not going to work for me. And why? And he goes, well, I like to swear, and I can't swear in front of, a female law clerk. And I'm like, why? You do just great in front of her, And so Jean turned out to be really opened his eyes, and suddenly all he wanted were female law clerks, because she was so bright and she was so great. And he had a total mindset change. And we saw it then carried forward, as Dean mentioned early on, with helping his female law clerks when they had young children to put in a child care center in the federal courthouse. So there were many moments like that where my dad was a real thinking human being who was always willing to kind of go back and revisit, beliefs that he thought were pretty firmly held.
Yeah, and that was quite an evolution to what we all heard him say, including in the film, that the future is bright because women are taking over the world.
I know.
Right. Could you talk a little bit? We had a couple of questions about what led him to start the Bell Shelter, and how did he get the idea for the Four Seasons robes?
I don't. Oh, the Four Seasons robes. Yeah, during Yom Kippur, I was sitting next to Harry, and he was reading this portion of the Bible, the Tanakh, and it talked about the sort of obligations to the poor, and leave the corners of your fields for the poor. And I think that he just reached the point in his life where he was tired of listening to other people talk about doing things and things not happening. So he just decided to go all in. And from that, all of a sudden it became a mission. And, it's a little bit of a long story about how he found Bell and, the folks that sort of helped him in using the McKinney Act, I believe it's called the McKinney Act, to find unused federal property that could be used to house the homeless, and his wonderful partner at GSA, Louise Oliver, and just, getting the unions involved to donate labor, and all of the things that it took to start that shelter, which is, I think, going on 30 years now. Maybe 500 or 600 people a night stay there. It's a wonderful place.
I remember how it really even began, because it was a very cold winter in Los Angeles, and suddenly there were people sleeping on the stairs of the courthouse. And my dad walked out, and he thought, this is just awful. So he goes back into the building, and he tells the guards, this is the people's, building. You open the doors and let them sleep in the lobby here. So they didn't know what to say. So they, followed his ruling. And so they let them all in. And then I think what happened is a lot of the people who worked in the building and judges started to really complain about what he was doing. And so he thought, well, I'm not going to let it just end there. And again, it goes back to the power of one person, and how this human being, who was so personable and so charismatic and made so many friends all throughout Los Angeles, was able to tap into those relationships to get things done. And because, you know, in a lot of arm twisting, like I remember Mayor Reardon saying, you know, you'd get a call in the middle of the night, you know, I need you to do something. So he really knew how to motivate people and wouldn't take no for an answer. And so he was determined to make that happen. And it just goes to show you what each of us is capable of doing.
Yeah, and it was for things huge like the Bell Shelter, and it's for things for any one of us individually too. You know, I can't tell you how many times he would call me and, you know, I think your firm should hire this law clerk. We don't really need anyone right now. Every day he would call until I finally, you know, made it happen, because he never stopped. So Liz Allor, one of our former clerks, she writes, I can't help but think that Harry would have done something to figure out a much better vaccine distribution in California than we've done. It was eye-opening for me as a clerk to see him take on a project, mobilize people, and get things done.
Yep.
And that's, you know, that's something I think everybody has taken away.
That's right. The stories are just never ending. You know, about when Joe Biden was in the Senate, I happened to have an early morning meeting and in Beverly Hills, and I got there early, and here's the Senator Biden. I'd met him years before at a fundraiser when I was a lawyer. I didn't know him, but he was by himself, and I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Senator Biden," and I said, "You know, I'm Dean Pregerson." He goes, Harry. He goes, he goes, I know Harry, say hi to him. And it's just that sort of connection that just seemed to never end. And I think it's because he was on the phone 24/7, as you know.
For sure. So here's a good one. What do you think he would have thought about the film?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know. I think he would have said something like, "Don't bother me with it. I'm busy." You know?
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I think he would have gone like, why would somebody make a film about me? Many years before my dad passed away, a very dear friend of mine, Sandy Dorman, who I think may even be on this Zoom link, said to me she had met a documentary filmmaker and a woman, and she wanted to interview my dad, and she wanted to document his life. And so I told my dad, and he's like, "Oh yeah, have her call me." Well, this poor woman kept calling and trying to arrange meetings. He just was like, "I don't have time for this." And you couldn't really pin him down. And then another time I tried to get somebody to interview him, to put his words into a story. Forget it. He just wouldn't take the time to do it. And so he just, he had better things to do than talk about himself, I think.
So there was a piece in the film about Congressman Corman, who played a really important role in all of this, in helping to sponsor Harry's being nominated for the federal bench and all that. But one person asked, did Judge Pregerson ever have any political ambitions? As another avenue where, people can be helped and all that. Did ever hear anything about that?
I think he loved politics in many ways, the sort of old style. I mean, he was student body president at UCLA and student body president of his high school. And, he really had so much potential. But I think in Jim Corman, a fellow Marine, he really had a kindred spirit. Jim was the son of a coal miner from West Virginia. Jim's dad died of black lung disease. You know, Jim was one of the co-sponsors of the Civil Rights Act. And they just, you know, I think that, you know, just that friendship really satisfied that sort of desire that Harry had.
You know, I think I sort of think about it from a different perspective, and I believe my dad would have probably wanted to go in that direction, but what stopped him was this whole fear of this Marine Corps story coming out. And I think he was very concerned about that. He was, you know, it was, you know, embarrassing to him or whatever, even though it wasn't a valid thing that happened. But I think that may have played into the fact why he didn't run for office, because I think he was concerned. You know, I think that story also of his, you know, working so hard to get his name cleared tells you another thing, how critical his reputation was. That is and he taught me that's the only thing that really matters, your reputation, your character. And so he fought hard until he received that. And the other person
Right.
who also was kicked out. So I don't know. I always wonder about that.
Yeah, you certainly had those gifts.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of the hour. There's a lot more questions in the chat box and some funny observations and personal stories and memories. And but I just want to thank Dean, Katie, Terry, you know, for this wonderful opportunity to see you, to talk about Harry Pregerson. Those of you who've not seen the film or have only seen it once, watch it again, because you'll get so much more out of it, and especially with the benefit of this conversation. I want to thank Robin Lipsky and Katja Kiston at the Society for putting all this together and getting such a huge crowd on, and it's been super fun and really a lot of happy, warm memories. So thank you both. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and take care.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See you.
Paul.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.